I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to have you here with us in London. Huge congratulations on this incredible documentary. I guess when it's a topic, a band, something so ubiquitous in the cultural consciousness, like the Beatles, it's quite a task to take on, particularly maybe to say something new. But you absolutely knock it out the park. When you had this first idea put at your doorstep, what was your first thought and why did you want to make the documentary?
Weirdly enough, a month before we had any talks at all about the documentary, I was at Jack Douglas at the Savannah Film Festival with Personality Crisis. He had mixed some music for Personality Crisis. And we sat down in the park one morning, and he told me this long, involved story about how listening to the Beatles for the first time changed his life. He wanted to be an actor. He was like 17 years old, and he then wanted to be a musician after hearing I Want to Hold Your Hand. And he bought a ticket to Liverpool, changed the trajectory of his life. So when we were talking to Apple, when this story was present in my mind, and it's something we talked about, it was twofold. I think probably Apple reached out to us because we're all New Yorkers, and we knew the Maisels very well. Marty had hired Al Maisels to shoot on Shine a Light. He had worked with the Maisels years earlier, David and Albert, both. But he hired Al Maisels to do behind-the-scenes rehearsal footage, and I got to shadow him for a couple days. You learn something about his energy and the process and what he was able to capture in his very unique way.
And I guess key to it is this incredible behind-the-scenes footage. What was it like working with that? I mean, I guess going through it all, deciding what you're going to use, but also the technology that you had available in order to enhance it, enhance the image, enhance the sound. So what was it like working with that? And were there any favourite moments that stood out to you? I mean, there's so many in the film, but did you have a personal favourite?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of your first question, too, is that what could be different about this film, that's this story that's been told so many times, is this footage that does not look like a ancient artifact, right? It was brought back to life through this restoration process that Peter Jackson's company in New Zealand was able to do. They stripped off all the vestiges of time, and it puts the audience into like that moment so deeply that you don't even feel like it's something that happened in the past. It feels very present, very vibrant. And then with the audio restoration that Wingnut, Peter Jackson's Wingnut company did, for the first time, you have the ability to hear the instruments, the voices, the vocals. The audience could be modulated so that you can actually hear the band, not being drowned out by the audience screaming. So to me, that's something that's never been experienced before, unless you were there. And even when you were there, like David Lynch in the film talks about, you couldn't hear anything. There were just girls screaming, and that's all you heard. So you couldn't really even hear the band. So you can finally hear and see them so clearly with this footage. And within that footage, you just see four really young, really charming, really funny guys just having a great time. And the joy is palpable.
I think what really stands out to me is how normal they all seem. And I don't know if that's just my sort of millennial modern day view on what a celebrity is and how people behave. But they're so down to earth. And there's a lot is also made of, their humour. This line, everyone in Liverpool is a comedian. And it really captures all these sort of nuanced moments. So was that also something great to have there in the footage and be able to put that in the film?
I mean, I think that was the heart of their appeal. They were very down-to-earth, authentic. From the point of view of somebody from New York, these guys could have been, someone in the film says he could have been from Mars. I mean, Liverpool could have been on Mars as far as they were concerned. On the one hand, on the other hand, there was this familiar quality to them. We're four, boys, essentially. George was 20, Ringo was 23. And you get the real sense in the footage, but even in the newsreel footage, they were being themselves.
And something that you do really well, I think, is contextualise this period of time. Because I guess if you've not lived through it, you might not fully grasp, the fact that this was just in the wake of the assassination of Kennedy, and what that meant to the American people, that they were in this state of mourning. And somehow the Beatles just arriving at that moment, it just sort of unleashed, this feeling of relief and of happiness. So how important was it also to provide that context?
Well, it's something that David and Martin Scorsese in the documentaries that we've made do so brilliantly is, they put a context around these incredible cultural and musical moments, right? That you've seen maybe clips of the Beatles in America at that time, and you just feel like, oh yeah, that was happy, and they were here, and the audiences were going crazy. But, it puts a different perspective on it when you know that it's 2.5 or even, 3 months later after Kennedy's assassination, the country is still in shock. They're in shock. It's winter. It's February. They've not come out of the shock and the trauma really of that time. So to have something joyful, some music, which music is always helpful for lifting people out of anything, right? Because it's a transcendent art form, right? And you really need music. Music is essential to human communication and experience. The fact that they were able to bring that to the country at that very time just seems kind of just what we needed at that time.
There's a few other threads that I think you can really pick up on. Like, I think there's lots of references to the fact that, the roots of rock and roll really were in Black music, and how actually in the US that wasn't something that was really being sort of spelled out or vocalized. And the fact that the Beatles were talking about that and not sort of having any kind of, not trying to hide that fact in any way. But also a key thread, I think, is just how much this music meant to people, and hearing from the fans, and just even now they're walking through a supermarket and they have to stop because it's something that's so deeply personal to them. So what do you think some of those other themes might be, and why was it important also to include those?
Within the footage, you do get the feeling, it's 1964, it's right before, everything changes. I mean, some people point the moment of change as Sullivan, Beatles and the Sullivan. But all these things, the counterculture, the anti-war movement, the women's movement, psychedelia, and more, civil rights, it's all, the country's on the cusp of change. 4 years later, things are going to be completely different, but you see it here. So for me, for instance, the most interesting thing was Betty Friedan talking about, the great feminist writer, talking about these young men with long hair are saying something. They're softer. It's a new masculinity. You don't have to kill bears. You don't have to, and she was right. It helped clarify what the Beatles were up to.
What else might you hope that people take away from watching this film, whether they were around at the time when the Beatles were big? Maybe they're Gen Z hearing about all this for the first time. I guess, it's realizing the importance that, music has in people's lives. And it's great to go back and remember just what impact they have had on people.
That's exactly what it is. It's like that music is a healing force. It can be a healing force. It can be any kind of expressive. It can express anger. It can express sadness. It can express joy. But that it is really core and essential to our lives, and that no matter what's happening in the world, to be, just simplistic about it, art exists to get us through those moments, whether it's music or painting or film or literature. I mean, these are things that are really essential for our survival. Without them, we don't really have a chance, because life is hard, and terrible things happen, and so it kind of gives us a reminder of how important that is. Kind of keep that central in our lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Huge congratulations on the film. Can't wait for everyone else to see it. Thanks a lot.
Great to talk
to
to
you.
you.
Thank you.